I think they're probably not releasing some of these files too because they have Trump's name in it and other people's names in it who the White House and the Trump DOJ doesn't want to be implicated. And I think that includes Bill Clinton to some extent.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Maddie Hale. Today it is Epstein Central. There is so much to discuss. I am joined today by Ed Krassenstein, the creator of KrassenCast.com. Ed, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. I know there's a ton of stuff to talk about with Epstein files. It just keeps getting worse and worse, doesn't it seem that way?
And just for context for our audience, you and your twin brother Brian really do a lot of independent investigative journalism, and you've had such a focus on the Epstein files. And while so many people may have stopped going through these 3 million files, you both have, kept your finger on the pulse, have been sifting through what's important, what's not important, what was redacted. So we're going to kick off with what happened yesterday. On Monday, Democrats Jamie Raskin and Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie, they went to the Department of Justice to review unredacted documents from the Epstein files. So there was quite a few revelations, including one victim of Epstein's was just 9 years old. They found out that at least 6 men whose names were redacted, despite having photos and evidence against them. Apparently there was a high-ranking individual in a foreign government, a prominent individual, a retired CEO, at least one US citizen. So can you walk me through what you believe were the main takeaways from their 2-hour review at the DOJ?
Yeah, I mean, it seems as though it's either the FBI, DOJ, or both are covering up for individuals who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein. And I think Raskin just came out earlier today and said that Trump's name was redacted several times. They went and they got to see some of the unredactions, and they saw that Trump's name had been redacted in the public release. At the same time, though, they say that there's some redactions that weren't unredacted for them because those files had been redacted by the FBI before they handed them over to the DOJ. So we're still not getting the complete picture. They're still not getting the complete picture. And I think we're just gradually seeing more and more and more. And it seems as though the DOJ or the FBI is covering up for Trump in some ways. We all heard the story that Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago back in 2005. It turns out that there's an email in the files that between Trump's lawyer and Epstein's lawyer that essentially says that Trump didn't kick Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, according to Jamie Raskin and some of the other congressmen and women who were there. So why are they covering for Trump? I think we all know the reason.
That's an interesting, and just for the audience, we're going to get into kind of specifics that was brought up by these lawmakers, but also a few things that have come out from the files. But you mentioned this Mar-a-Lago lie. So I want to explain what this is. So Democratic Congresswoman Becca Balint, she claimed that files she saw yesterday contradicted what Trump had said about kicking Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, as you said. She said that from what she's seen, Trump was lying about that. Then Jamie Raskin backed this up in a separate comment saying emails indicate that Epstein wasn't a member of Mar-a-Lago. He was just a guest and he was never asked to leave. But the question is obviously, why would Trump lie? But more so, Ed, why would that be redacted?
Yeah, I mean, why would Trump lie? Just because I think he wants to distance himself from Epstein as much as he possibly can. And I think if they didn't redact it, Trump would have been exposed for the lie. But now we're seeing these redactions become unredacted, and it just makes it look worse for the DOJ. Same with Howard Lutnick claiming that he cut ties with Jeffrey Epstein in 2005, and now it turns out that he was on the island in 2012, years after Epstein was convicted in a court. So I mean, it's crazy. It really is, and the DOJ covering it up because they don't want us to see that all these Trump connections are in the Epstein files and we're on the island and had all these deeper connections than anybody had ever imagined.
So before Thomas Massie and the others went to the DOJ, he had asked users on X what they wanted him to look into before he went. So he basically wrote a tweet and said, send me the numbers from the Epstein files. I'll look into this. I'll see why something was redacted, what was redacted. So several users asked him to look into a 2009 email that read, where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video. So that was an email from Epstein to someone whose email address name was redacted. So he went and searched for this document and he concluded that a Sultan had sent the email to Epstein. And we now know that this is allegedly, Ed, a very famous CEO and chairman who apparently sent this torture video to Epstein. So do we know much more about that?
I don't think we do yet, but hopefully we'll find out more. But I mean, why would they redact that? Why would they redact the man who sent Epstein a torture video? They're only supposed to be redacting the victims or anything that's, highly classified. It seems like the DOJ is just trying to cover up for some of these elites, there's some of these super wealthy political figures that they don't want the American people or really the world to find out about. We're seeing what's happening in the UK, people are actually facing consequences. But for some reason in America, that's no longer a thing. After years and years of Republicans begging for the Epstein files, now they're essentially covering them up.
What more do we know about these co-conspirators and what was shown, I guess, through these redacted files that these lawmakers saw yesterday? You mentioned Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. He was mentioned a few times, and now he's been asked to resign by various, well, Thomas Massie being one, asking him to step down from his role.
Yeah, and I believe Lutnick was on on Capitol Hill earlier today. I believe he's still testifying, and he was asked about that lie that he had cut ties with Epstein in 2005 and only had very minor contact with him even then. He admitted to going to Epstein Island. He said with his family, with his kids, and with his wife and another couple in 2012. He acknowledges that now. But why did he lie about it in the first place? Or why was that covered up in the Epstein files until it was unredacted? I don't know. I think they just don't want people knowing who was there, what was actually going on.
Thomas Massie had basically said the incentive for this is to find the men who Epstein trafficked women to correct the mistakes of the DOJ. Now that lawmakers have seen these, well, some of these unredacted names, Massie was asked on CNN why he isn't naming these names publicly now that he's seen them himself. And he basically said that he wants the DOJ to do it, but he will broadcast these identities from the floor or in the committee hearing. But just for your understanding, Ed, why do you think he wants to leave that up to the DOJ to do?
I think because the DOJ keeps stumbling and keeps getting caught in this cover up, and the more he forces them to do it, the more it becomes transparent that they're partaking in this cover up. And don't forget, Massie also claimed months and months ago that he has a list that was compiled by the victims themselves, but he's not releasing that because he wants the DOJ to. And I think the fact that they haven't, I think it lends itself to the fact that they are involved in this cover up. They don't want some of these, perpetrators to their names to get out there. A lot of them do have connections to, Trump. A lot of them have connection to high ranks in the government, military. So I think the DOJ is trying to cover it up for some reason. And I think Massey's I think he's kind of holding that trump card in his pocket saying, hey, I have this information. If you don't release it all, I'm going to call you out on it. And the DOJ doesn't know exactly what Massie has. So it kind of forces their hand into releasing as much as they have. It's happening gradually. Hopefully we see everything. They still have half the files still haven't even been released. Everything, there's so many files that are completely redacted. Every page of a document, which are some I think are over 100 pages long, have been completely blacked out. So why aren't we seeing those? They're obviously not just victim names, but I think over time the DOJ is going to be forced to show us to us. I think the FBI is going to be forced to unredact some of this stuff.
Not only, yeah, you mentioned, so just for context, 3 million files dropped nearly 2 weeks ago, but there's 6 million files in the hands of the DOJ. And then, of course, these 3 million files, there's also reductions, as we've been discussing. But The FBI had already scrubbed the Epstein files back in March before handing them over to the DOJ to review. So, I mean, Ed, it's almost like we'll likely never really see the full extent of crimes committed and by who.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're wrong. I hope there is a way to get back the original unredacted files. Hopefully, the FBI still has them. I would imagine that they do exist somewhere. And I don't know if it's going to take the impeachment of Kash Patel, impeachment of Pam Bondi to eventually get them. And I don't think that will happen as long as Republicans have the House and Senate. But perhaps when Democrats, if after the November elections retake the House, maybe even the Senate, I think we'll be able to get a lot more information. I think we'll be able to see, the Steve Bannons, the Elon Musks, the Howard Lutnicks testify about their experiences and the information that they have without Republicans covering for them.
Khanna questioned who these six men's names were and why they were redacted. He said, as marked of co-conspirators, there's no reason they should be covering up for these names. But the argument about this is that the DOJ potentially violated the Epstein Files Transparency Act that passed late last year. So, I mean, has the DOJ essentially broken the law?
Yeah, I mean, they have broken the law. The DOJ has, and now it appears the FBI has as well, of going by what the Congress people are saying has any truth to it. So, yeah, I mean, Democrats could hold them accountable once they retake the House. Hopefully, that's the way things are going. But at the same time, Trump can also pardon them. These would be federal crimes, and Trump could pardon them. And I'm not even ruling out the idea that Trump could pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. I think that's something that could happen. It probably wouldn't be before the midterms, but I could definitely see him doing that after the midterms to kind of continue the cover up.
We'll get into Ghislaine Maxwell in a minute, but I want to talk about this screenshot from the files that you posted on your account. It was a table of names, and next to it, whether, according to one of the Epstein victims, whether this person knew or was involved in any criminality. So it says Donald Trump's name, and then next to it, it reads knowledge of finances and defendant's sexual desire for minor girls. So this is in conjunction with the fact that a 2019 FBI interview in the DOJ files is with a Palm Beach police chief, the former chief, who says in this interview that Donald Trump called him in 2006 after Epstein's first criminal sex charge went public and said to the police chief, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this." So these two things in conjunction with each other, Ed, contradict Donald Trump's entire narrative that he has no knowledge of Epstein's criminality, that he's obviously been transparent in the sense that he said, yeah, we hung out socially, we were friends, we had a falling out, but I had no knowledge or understanding of what was going on.
Yeah, and I think, he's telling the police one thing and he's telling the public another thing. And I think they're both meant to protect him. I think he told the police, oh, yeah, he's a bad man, so that he doesn't look like, oh, Trump hung out with him all the time. Epstein said Trump was his best friend. He doesn't want that on him. He doesn't want the police investigating him for his connections. So he's telling them one thing, like, oh, yeah, Epstein's a bad guy. I don't like him. But he's telling the public, I didn't even know about this stuff. It's a way he's protecting himself. He was protecting him from the police, and now he's protecting himself from the public. He is probably hoping that, the two wouldn't cross over and people wouldn't find out his statement that he told the police. But then you have people on the right saying, oh, this is evidence that Trump had nothing to do with it. He told the police he had nothing to do with it. No, that's evidence that he didn't want the police thinking he had anything to do with it.
In September last year, FBI Director Kash Patel testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee where he claimed that the Bureau had no credible information showing that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked young women or underage girls for anyone else besides himself. So this is, of course, you see Thomas Massie talking under oath about how, from the knowledge that he has before he's gone through these files, when he's speaking to witnesses and he's going through these testimonies, that he could name, 20 people that off the top of his head, which he never said publicly. But from the files that were dropped nearly 2 weeks ago and from what Massie and Khanna have seen, does this show that the head of the FBI was lying under oath?
I think it does. I mean, I think anybody who can read the Epstein files And anybody who trusts that Massie isn't lying, which I mean, I don't see any, given that he's a Republican, I don't see any reason why he would be lying about any of this stuff. I think it's quite evident that Kash Patel was lying under oath. And I think all signs point that way.
The DOJ claims that redactions were made due to protecting victims' identity, which is why some of the men had their names redacted as well. But Ed, I mean, make this make sense. Why is the DOJ saying that in order to protect victims, the perpetrators also have to have their names redacted?
It doesn't make any sense. I can't make any sense of it. Can you?
Ghislaine Maxwell, as we mentioned, she appeared remotely from a federal prison for a closed-door deposition held by the House Oversight Committee on Monday. But instead of answering their questions about her role in Epstein's sex trafficking ring, she pled the Fifth Amendment, and her lawyer said that she was prepared to speak fully and honestly if granted clemency by the president. I mean, it's unsurprising that this was her approach. But what was your reaction to seeing that, Ed? And you mentioned that you did think that Trump would grant her a pardon.
I mean, it's so transparent. I think anybody can see what's going on here is that she's offering Trump, oh, I'm going to clear your name in exchange for you clearing mine and you letting me go free. The DOJ has already transferred her into this small box cell with a bed and a toilet into this country club like prison in which she gets to go for walks and listen to music and, do stuff that people would be doing in country clubs. And that happened after Ghislaine Maxwell had a meeting with the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche. So something happened there. She, of course, won't tell anyone in Congress what that meeting was about. But it happened, and then she was transferred. I think it's an attempt by the Trump DOJ to get Maxwell to cooperate and not to demonize Trump, not to maybe say some things that might incriminate Trump or some people close to Trump.
Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Sansbury, she spoke to reporters after leaving the deposition with Ghislaine Maxwell, and this is what she said. She said, "We know that there are more than 3 dozen associates, family members, and individuals directly associated with Donald Trump named in those files. There are now at least 9 or 10 other countries across the world that have opened investigations or forced their leaders to step down because of their mere association with Jeffrey Epstein. And the US government is engaged in an active cover-up of the largest sex trafficking scandal and influence peddling scandal in the history of the US, and Donald Trump is right at the center of it. And the person who is living to provide the evidence, who knows what is going on, is trying to invoke the Fifth to buy her clemency." So very strong words from the Congresswoman there, but she's saying 3 dozen family members and individuals associated with Trump in these files. Then, of course, 9 or 10 countries have already opened investigations, including the king, who's saying his own brother should be investigated. So, I mean, why is the United States not looking into investigating potential crimes?
It's become so cult-like here in America. I feel like Trump supporters, they're willing to bend to whatever Trump does, whatever Trump says, and they don't want him to be caught. It's not that they they know there's a possibility that the files could implicate him in some way. I'm not saying he did stuff to young girls, but he could be implicated in that he knew what was going on and didn't tell people. Like it appears that way. I think many of Trump supporters, I think they are protecting Trump, so they're not calling for that. And before Trump came along, I think America was the standard for anti-corruption. You know, people wouldn't take this. And then Trump came along and, you had the Access Hollywood tape and things started spiraling from there. Trump says, I could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a vote. And I honestly think that is the truth. We're seeing that play out. We saw it play out with, the ICE killings, and now we're seeing it play out with Epstein files. They're willing to bend for Donald Trump.
Just finally, Ed, these lawmakers who went and reviewed these redacted files at the DOJ yesterday, they only did it for 2 hours, which they said, look, we don't have the time and it shouldn't be our job to go through 3 million files. So there could be a lot more information out there, a lot more redactions that we need to see. Is this the end of this, or do you think there's more to come?
No, I mean, I think there's more to come. I think we're going to eventually see the rest of the files dumped. I think there has to be emails from Donald Trump. There has to be emails from Bill Clinton. Epstein was close to both those men. He had communication with them. Why isn't there a single email from Donald Trump or Bill Clinton to Epstein? Why isn't there a single email from Epstein to Clinton or Trump? I think there's more out there that we're not seeing. If we already know that they redacted Trump's name in some of these files, uh, I think they're probably not releasing some of these files too because they have Trump's name in it and other people's names in it who the White House and the Trump DOJ doesn't want to be implicated. And I think that includes Bill Clinton to some extent.
Ed Krassenstein, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Thanks for having me, Maddie. Appreciate it.